Ahora sí. Muy buenos días.
Good morning. We would like to welcome you to this colloquium of the Greater South. We greet with respect and thankful the panelists from Africa, Asia, Latin America, and the Caribbean. We wish you a great stay in our country. The Greater South Colloquium has been organized by the Organization of Southern Cooperation together with the University of Latin America and the Caribbean and the National University of Avellaneda. The objective that we want to reach these days of intense work is to foster exchange and a space of horizontal dialogue among artists, professionals, the academia, and the public in general, building upon solidarities for the encounter and creation of new networks and cooperations around a renewed vision of the artistic vision and the elaboration of patrimony. To promote self-reinstatement, giving visibility to non-conventional voices of the Greater South, strengthening their agency capacity and self-representation at the global scenario. To open this colloquium, we will hear from engineer Jorge Calzoni, who is the president of the National University of Avellaneda and also president of UDUALC. Good morning, everyone. Welcome, everyone. We are really pleased and proud for being part of this meeting. We have General Secretary who would tell you better what this Organization of Southern Cooperation is, but this has to do with the anniversary of the organization on May 18th, and there were two exchanges. One, we have Ricardo Foster here, who gave a conference in Addis Ababa, and Salomon Efal, who also was here at the same room giving a conference with a full audience. Then we had the festival, and it was a whole work that we did for 3 days in Addis Ababa, and this had to do with having artists related with the peoples, just joining peoples and artists, as the spokesman said, regardless of the governments. So this is an organization that have state members, but unlike other international organizations that are associated members that are not states, as our university. And we have to be chairs, and we are presenting other different issues other than agreements between state members. This is why this great organization of the Greater South really urges us to build bridges among our people. So we will have intellectuals and thinkers from different parts of the world. I would also like to thank those who are part of the organization of this event, Rodolfo Amawe and Akulsi, who unfortunately cannot be here with us today because he was denied the visa. And I have to say this, the Argentinian consulate in Africa has denied the visa to some of the participants who should be here. And I say this and feeling ashamed as an Argentine person, but I want this to be known because otherwise it would be hidden. And I think that this is some of the things that we need to solve, because one of the things that we need to be able to solve is to accept the free circulation of people, especially those who speak of freedom. Intellectuals, but all kinds of people should be able to circulate freely all over the world. And this is something that needs to be taken into account. And we say this but really ashamed because we made all the possible efforts, both from the organization and from the university, to try and solve this situation, and we were not able to achieve it. So I would like to give my greetings to our friend Kunzi, who made a strong effort so as to organize this event, and unfortunately we cannot have him with us today. Having said all this, we would like to invite you throughout all this day and also tomorrow, where we will have a cycle of conferences, and we believe that are really important and that they tie in with these issues and ideas. So please, let's use these as a tool in order to build these bridges that the OSCE states. So welcome to Argentina. Thank you for sharing this space, and let's hope that we can take with us ideas. I'm sure we will be able to do so, because the speakers, panelists have this capacity of making us think that another world is possible in spite of all these issues that we are encountering these days. So welcome, everyone. We would like to thank the President. Now, the Greater South Colloquium has been organized by the Organization of Southern Cooperation together with Latin Union of Universities of Latin America and the Caribbean and the University of Avellaneda. We would like to inform you that this is being streamed from the channels of our university. Now we will give the floor to the General Secretary from the OSCE from Saudi Arabia, Manssour bin Mussallam. My dear President of UNDAV, National University of Avellaneda, dear panelists, ladies and gentlemen, first and foremost, I would like to express my thanks on behalf of the Organization of Southern Cooperation and UNDAV, and also our friend Rodolfo, especially not only for having received our delegation so kindly and with such warm hospitality, but also I would like to thank him for having had the courage of co-organizing this colloquium. In second place, it would be irresponsible from my side if I did not present my apologies for a Spanish that still is sometimes, and in spite of my best efforts, an approximate version of Spanish. And I would also like to highlight, of course, what the president of the university said in a much more eloquent way, and that is, even though we feel honored with the participation of the panelists that are joining us today, and we are excited because of all the fruitful conversations that we will have in the next few days in this colloquium, it is unfortunate that the Greater South Colloquium has turned because the visa was denied to all of the African participants, and even the officials from an international organization, even my Deputy General Secretary for Innovation and Technology, and even As the president said, Akul Silanko, the chair of our Office of Patrimony and Arts, and the main coordinator on behalf of the OSC of this colloquium. And I believe that it's unfortunate, just to quote the statement that one of the guests said, a great writer, intellectual who could not receive his visa, Boubacar Boris Diop from Senegal, and he said in his statement that the decision that was made of rejecting the visas of all the African participants, it does not even make people angry. It makes people sad. Because if our artists, our intellectuals, our peoples cannot get together today, then when? And I say this because, and maybe we need to highlight the importance precisely, and this is what makes it evident. And I say the importance of the spirit of the Festival of the Greater South, that is the importance of this colloquium. And I say this being ahead of an intergovernmental organization. If the South-South cooperation is limited to the agreements among our governments, it will not have any sustainability whatsoever. And simultaneously, and above all, we have the collective duty of building bridges among peoples. And I say this because without bridges, ladies and gentlemen, without bridges there's no sovereignty. There is only loneliness. And I believe, and I'd rather risk saying that the infamous reputation that I have won once I was appointed Secretary General of being an endless, never-ending speaker. Now, I would like to say, or simply add, that we came to a conclusion, an undoubtedly conclusion, and that is almost an obvious one. We are going through a moment, and this colloquium is taking place at a moment of global disorder. And amidst this global situation, we need to have something that someone said, we need to have a sense of the historical moment we're going through if we want to change everything that needs to be changed. And of course, this historical moment is a historical moment in which the world order inherited from the 90s, that is, that order that worsened the environmental imbalance, that de-articulated our social contracts, the one that worsened inequalities. But in spite of all this, it achieved something inequality, that is to make everyone believe, almost in a mystical sense, that the end of the world and that the exclusion of humanity was more probable than the end of the system and the inherited order. I do not dare use the word. That system, since January, for reasons that are not necessary to name a number, it has showed a terminal decline. Even though in 1992 the end of history was proclaimed, we could very well say or claim that this is the end of illusion. And it's because of this reason, ladies and gentlemen, that this colloquium is so important. Because the Greater South is not just called to bury a decadent order, because we are interested in administering or managing ruins, because where some manage decadence, then we collectively are just building and sowing what is new. But this requires, as I said initially, this requires bridges among our peoples. And today, this colloquium is one of these bridges. But it requires, above all, beyond the technical and the programmatic issues, it requires from each one of us to dare reconquer our collective capacity to dream. That is a capacity that was stolen from us in the 90s. The dream that was legitimized in politics, the horizon and the utopia that would call people to demonstrate and march, was eclipsed. And today it is our turn to renew this dreaming capacity, to reinstate with value that we do dream, that we do articulate a vision and a horizon that goes beyond the upcoming election, that goes even beyond our own biological lives, what guides us. Because without memories that have molded us, and without the aspirations that also guide us, we cannot walk. And what we have to do is to lead the path as we do. But I don't want to abuse from the time, because the panelists that are here with us today, I'm sure they will have to say more things in a more interesting way than what I can say. But I would simply like to add that this colloquium and this festival, the collective efforts that we have made, they can be summarized with the words of Mario Benedetti, who said that some people dismiss and some people can achieve the impossible, so that everybody knows that the South also exists.
Agradecemos la palabra.
We will now have the word of we thank for the kind words from our General Secretary, and now we will introduce the panelists for today. For the first roundtable, the geopolitical challenges from the Great South. So, with this in mind, we invite Jorge Taiana, former Foreign Affairs Minister of the Foreign Affairs Ministry. We also invite Diva Moreira, political analyst and specialist on legal restoration from Brazil. Atilio Borón, sociologist, essay writer, author from Argentina. And this roundtable will be moderated by Telma Luzzani, international analyst and journalist.
Bueno, buenos días.
Good day.
Muchísimas gracias a todos por estar
Thank you so much for being here in this very interesting roundtable after Manssour bin Sallam kind words, so inspiring. And with this, I will introduce this first roundtable for today's colloquium. I will introduce all of our members, all of our participants.
Mussallam, Secretario General de la
Organización de Cooperación del Sur, que es una organización Secretary General of the Organization of Southern Cooperation to constitute an alternative way of development to strengthen the link amongst South-South countries. That is the main objective of the OSC. Mr. Jorge Taiana, former Ministry of Defense, former Foreign Affairs Minister, a great officer from our political environment, Diva Moreira, social and political analyst, a popular fighter with multiple awards in Brazil, and Dr. Atilio Borón, sociologist, graduated from Harvard, a great Argentine thinker, author of very interesting books, especially on the topic of today, hegemonic transition, that is being led throughout the world, and he will be dealing with this topic. And to start, I will pass the microphone to Mr. Atilio Borón. You have 15-20 minutes. I will not stop you, but please try to stick to the allotted time so we can stick to our agenda for today. Well, first of all, thank you so much for this kind invitation to be part of this great roundtable. It is a huge pleasure for me to be here to talk about the topics of today, to think about this very peculiar time that the international system is going through. Manssour, Secretary Manssour, has very well said that we are going through times of transition where some things are dying, which is an inevitable death, and this is contradictory with our lack of patience. So the important thing to say is that this system that exists since the Second World War and was reinforced and became more virulent with the implosion of the Soviet Union, and this gave place to speculation on what we call the new American century, where a lot of academia, specialists, and advisors to the United States proclaimed the end of ideology and the fight or the class struggles, and they also denominated this the initiation of the American empire, the century of America. When they talk about America and the United States, they mean the United States of America. So they said that the 21st century was going to become the American century. And this was quite short. Some very intelligent intellectuals did not believe in this. For example, someone like Mr. Grudzinski, despite his strongly anti-communist stance and very reactionary stance in many issues, he had a very broad analytic capacity, and he criticized strongly this belief that the 21st century was going to become the American century. There is a very interesting book that was published in 1997, the big world dashboard, and they warned in this book that what they were announcing of the announcement of the American century was quite dangerous. And he even, I remember quite well, said in his book that there were three possible scenarios that could complicate the attainment of this bipolar world where the United States was the big leader released from the threat of the Soviet Union. So he said there were three possible scenarios that could undermine the feasibility of this eternal unipolarism. The first scenario is that Russia, Germany, and France would become allies or would make up a coalition based on commercial, economic, and political interests and mutual dependency, because he very well said that the European countries have dependence on the energy supplying from Russia, that it has abundant energy resources. When we talk about Russia, we talk about one of the largest or the largest country in the world. Russia is as big as South America, and so Brzezinski said we have to be very careful. Our politics and our policies have to try to hinder any type of articulation or cooperation between Russia, France, and Germany. So the foreign policy in the United States through NATO worked strongly on this. And there is a second scenario, possible scenario, which is the fact that they can think that it will be the American century, but what happens if two big countries or colosseum unite? Technological colosseum such as Japan and a demographic and economic colosseum as China. This would constitute a huge barrier for the future of the 21st century, and there the U.S. would have to stumble over a very strong coalition. And he stated that this is not highly probable because, I mean, it may happen, but the remembrances of the Japanese occupation of China are still raw, and it was a very bloody occupation. And, you know, history is filled with atrocities, but the atrocities by the Japanese in China during their occupation are still very raw, very fresh in their memories. So this would be very negative for the U.S. However, it's not very probable. And then there's a third scenario scenario, less probable than the other two, which would be an agreement between Russia, China, and Iran. So, look at this. I mean, as the Ruben Blades says, life brings about surprises, and one of the big surprises is that the least probable scenario and the more dangerous scenario is what finally became true. And today we are witnessing and this is something we've seen on the news just recently, about this probable scenario becoming a reality. So we are now amongst an international system that has changed profoundly, and it has changed due to many reasons, one of them being the economic decay of the United States, and they drank from their own medicine in applying to their own countries the Washington Consensus measures, ended up industrializing the United States. They lost almost 90,000 industries as of the 80s, and most of which went bankrupt, and the stronger ones regrouped in China, Taiwan, Singapore, Hong Kong, etc. So when Trump says that we have to industrialize the United States, well, there's no turning back. They have no labor, and the economically active population in the United States in the industrial sector is only of 9%. So it's the profile of an underdeveloped agricultural country. They have lost the technological race in everything that's related to IT, satellites, telecoms. The United States is lagging behind. And this is not a criticism from somebody who is looking at them very angry because of the atrocities that they've played out, but because I'm following what Jimmy Carter anticipated. He very well said, we are going to, he said in 2019, in a ceremony in the Baptist church in his hometown, in Plains, in Georgia, and he was member of this congregation, and he said, we are going to turn 200 years of independent life, and throughout this lifetime, only during 18 of them, we've had times of peace without any wars abroad. And he went on to enumerate all of them. So it's just 19 years out of 200 years they've been at peace with the world. And he said, we have spent all of our resources throughout these years, and China has more patents in avant-garde technology compared to the United States. In 2010, China was not included in these statistics. I don't know when all of the patents are recorded. I think that there's some office in Basilia or in Basel or in Switzerland, but this was in 2010, and China had no technological patents, and 10 years afterwards, they are the leaders. And this is recognized by an American or a U.S. journalist, so there's no bias there. And I believe that we had this article in La Nación from Nicholas Friedman, and it's called A Trip to the Future, to a Future Land. And it was not Trump's United States, and they talk about China for example, rare soil. Well, this is highly important as a decisive element for new technologies and new devices that need to use this kind of IT technology. And I found in China 39 universities with PhDs centered on rare soils. And when I tried to find out how many we had in the United States, we didn't have not even one who had a PhD on rare soils. There was only one university with one subject that was dealing with this. So then they start talking about the railroad in China at 400 kilometers per hour, and they have 35,000 kilometers of high-speed railroads compared to the United States. And that's an average speed. It's not a supersonic speed. So these things show that the United States is on the decline. However, they can, as a wounded victim, turn into a very dangerous animal. The United States is willing to lose Africa, entire regions on the Middle East or Europe or the rest of Asia, but they're not willing to lose Latin America and the Caribbean. I mean, they're not saying that outright, brutally, as I'm saying. However, if you read between the lines, it's very clear that they're highly concerned with this. I will give you the example of Nepal. He corrects himself, Laos, which is a country defined by themselves in their own constitution as Marxist and Maoists, and they have a lot of principles that if Maduro would say this, or Hanei would be headlines about nepotism and dictatorship and authoritarianism. But this happens in Laos, and they don't care about that. Imagine if a president of Argentina or any other Latin American country forces a constitution where they established Marxism as the main ideology or single political party in the country. This would originate a very fierce mass media campaign against that country. So, if a country in Latin America or the Caribbean adopts a position that tries to reformulate, let's think about Chile, the pension fund, as the World Bank has said, this is a theft. And they say that they are a communist country. Or the probable mayor of New York, this character, exceptional character, a guy born in Uganda with Indian parents, with a Muslim religion, and he has declared, and he has won over Andrew Cuomo in New York, saying that if Netanyahu goes to New York, they would put him in prison and take him to the international courts. And also talking about the need to favor the struggles of the Palestine people on applying 1% taxes on the wealthy population of New York, and also a lot of other policies. And Trump has said he's a lunatic, he's a communist, and he will never be accepted in the U.S. So these are the double standards I'm talking about. And this talks about our lack of patience for our policies. And the United States is very powerful and very important, but they won't be able to call the shots as they were used to. How long have I been speaking? Too long. I will round it up. This is just the appetizer, don't worry. So to conclude, in light of this, the United States is taking the offensive role, and this is played out in this side of the world, because this is the part they most care about. And as Ali Rodriguez said, the General Secretary of Manssour, Venezuelan guy, he said Latin America and the Caribbean are the cradle of natural resources, and that is why this awakens the hunger of the empire. So this is something we've seen with the regular visits of the South Command from the United States, Admiral Joseph, that has come down recently, and the visit of 3 senior officers from the United States in less than a month. The Secretary of State, the Ministry of Health, Robert Kennedy Jr., and he's a terraplanist, anti-vaccine guy who came here, and that is very strange for 3 high-level officials from the United States come down here, and that's because we have some kind of special interest to them. And I would like to highlight again that what we need to do in our countries is to keep far away from China. That's what they want, to keep China away from Argentina. That's what they want. And I will be rounding up right now. When I say they, I mean the U.S. They believe that China will take hold of the resources that they want for them. And that's evident. And they cannot manage an important piece of information, which is the huge growth that China has had in Latin America. Just 2 general figures. In the year 2000, China had a trade balance with Latin America and the Caribbean of around $12 billion. In 2023, 23 years afterwards, this had gone up to $486 billion of the trade balance. So 40 times more in just 23 years. And that's why they have this very important concern in making sure that we cut all of our commercial, cultural, political, and diplomatic bonds with China. But there is an economic reality that we cannot hide away from, which they are partners of Brazil, Ecuador, Chile, the second one in Argentina, and the second commercial partner in Mexico. So they're trying to impose and facilitate governments as the ones we have here in Argentina that abide by the U.S. project in leaving aside or minimize China's presence, like, for example, in Argentina's case, by stagnating all of our public works in the south, which have been quite fruitful, and also suspending the incorporation of Argentina into the BRICS, which is very unfortunate and shameful. And in this line of thought, we would like to present our apologies to our African and Asian colleagues, because our ideological and fanatized foreign affairs ministry has rejected the visa to those colleagues who had to come down today and be with us and enjoy this colloquium. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Atilio. Thank you for all this outlook and for all this incentive of everything that we need to do, how difficult it is, but all the things that we need to do for the challenges for the Greater South. I would just like to add one more thing. Now, Wasesinski sent a video from the year 2000 from Fidel Castro, where he exactly said this. He said China, Iran, and Russia, will probably be the next challenge, and it is very likely that there's some kind of war or conflict in the upcoming years. And this is something that Fidel Castro said in 2010, if I remember correctly, so a visionary. And now we present Diva Moreira. As I said, she's a political activist, a political analyst, and she also worked in the movement of women and the black population of Belo Horizonte. Thank you very much. Diva. Can you hear me? Good morning, everyone. I do not speak Spanish. I just speak Portuguese. Therefore, I have my presentation in Spanish, and I apologize ahead of time for my limitation, because I will be reading in Spanish but without speaking Spanish. It's a great honor for me to be here with you today, representatives of the Organization of Southern Cooperation. Most of them coming from, but unfortunately from the countries where we have the African diaspora of the Americas. Ancestral greetings. I would also like to greet Mr. Manssour bin Mussallam from Saudi Arabia, one of the founders and general secretary of the organization, as well as our colleague Kulsi Lenko, who had very kindly invited me to share with you and to think on the redress in the context of globalization. And I would like to, well, everybody knows the issue we had with the visa, because I really, I'm very sorry that our colleague Kulsi Lemko is not with us today. I have read the strategic plan of the Organization of Southern Cooperation, and I liked it a lot, because I believe that my intervention is aligned with this vision. The Black thinker and geographer from Brazil, Milton Santos, left an invaluable work that is titled Toward Another Globalization, From the Single Thought to Universal Conscious. In this book, he classifies globalization in 3 types, and he denounces that in the current state, our world is deeply perverse. It's a perversity. And he describes how globalization imposes growing levels of unemployment, poverty, deterioration of the quality of life of the middle classes. Hunger and the lack of housing is generalized in all the continents. And I continue quoting, because I precisely identify with Santos' thought. Child mortality prevails at the expense of progress in medicine and information. Quality education is every time more inaccessible. The spiritual evils are deepened as selfishness, cynicism, and corruptions. I also add other things in this category of the spiritual and moral evils, and that is the traffic and consumption of drugs and drug trafficking as the fentanyl that has caused issues of public health in the United States, and it expands in countries of the South as Costa Rica, Colombia, Ecuador, Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, Argentina, Uruguay, and Brazil. I don't know how this situation is in your countries, but we have societies that do not offer any sense for their members, nor promote a citizenship, let alone the sense of belonging. Their populations feel attracted by easy money and just pleasures that could lead them to the crime at the hands of police violence, mass incarceration, suicide, and death due to overdose. All this social disintegration is the result of a system that oppresses us. The current globalization, according to Milton Santos, that talked about this in the previous millennium, and at the beginning of this current millennium. The current globalization, according to the author, has adopted brutal entrepreneurships in order to reduce our populations and deepen the moral crisis. Facing this reality, it's possible to imagine and build a different globalization, a human one, that takes advantage of the technical and scientific basics for social and political objectives that benefit everyone and not only the elites. It's essential to understand who are the peoples of the South and the North. In our countries, the colonizing North many times is represented by elites that were educated in European universities or universities from the United States that oppress and exploits the working classes and the Afro-descendant peoples and the indigenous communities. The fight in the South-South world should be mainstreamed by the fight of classes and decolonization. On the other hand, in the global North, we have excluded communities as the black ghettos in France or the favelas and the populations of homeless in the United States that reflect inequalities and structural exclusion. Currently, capitalism presents itself with misleading names, market economy, globalization, that for us, since Lenin, it's imperialism, that is the last stage of capitalism, the imperialist strategy that puts all the humankind at risk, and it seeks to have a unipolar logic controlling the resources and populations through mechanisms that perpetuate inequalities and dependency. In Africa, history is marked by neocolonial agreements, as those imposed by the IMF, that have submitted countries to abusive debts, conditioning their sovereignties and promoting the economic dependency. The African foreign debt reaches extraordinary figures, and regional institutions for integrations, they still do not have projects as an African central bank or a continental money that could promote economic autonomy. Social movements in young countries as Kenya have protested against the neoliberal policies that are linked to these agreements, demanding sovereignty and social justice. The debt and the conditions imposed by international agencies generate poverty, inequalities, and a never-ending underdevelopment. In our fight for redress, we need to promote sovereign audits of the debt, as Ecuador did in 2007. And we need to strengthen the citizen engagement and participation in the control and oversight and transparency of public resources. The history of fight in Africa of figures as Almícar Cabral teaches us that the true battle is to go beyond our own contradictions and to resist the external impositions. I believe that this fight for redress that we are carrying out in Brazil and in also many other countries of the world, and the fight for another globalization, I believe that these two battles can exchange objective strategies and adopt joint action plans that can have the same purpose of building being an harmony in Pachamama, as the indigenous people say, and the peasants in Latin America, Mother Earth. So first, I would like to start with globalization. The peoples from the South, well, we need a globalization to replace the perversities of the neoliberal globalization and the hegemonic powers. We also need to learn that redressing historical injustices committed by the same powers against women, against black women and men in Africa, enslaved at the diaspora in the Americas, and against the indigenous peoples cannot be dissociated from the fight against the beast that destroyed peoples, economies, cultures, and ecosystems. We are talking about a South globalization, and I ask you, is this geographic or epistemic? Are you? Wait, I'm not done. Why do I make this question? So why do I pose this question? In Brazil, our leading classes and elites, generally speaking, are completely delinked from any feeling or national identity. And I mean especially the descendants from European immigrants that got to Brazil, just like the case of Argentina, in projects, private emigration projects subsidized by the government. In the case of Brazil, in order to replace the black population in the free work market after the abolition of slavery in 1888. These elites have supremacist dreams of building Brazil from the south and separate the northeast and the north of the country. That would make the Brazil of the inferior peoples. Up until today, they feel superior and they discriminate even white Brazilians, called pelos duros, as they say in Rio Grande do Sul. True white people are those who descend from Europeans, from mother and father, and they have a trend to the right or extreme right wing, with some exceptions, of course. For example, the grandfather of former President Bolsonaro was from Veneto, a poor region from Italy back in those times. So, as long as he was defeated, he went abroad, and he was seen on social media with a T-shirt of an Italian party saying that he was no longer Brazilian, but he was Italian. So why do I tell you this anecdote? Well, I started off by saying that the South could be an epistemic metaphor, not only a geographical place. Our fights and battles should face different institutions from the North that end up inserting us in the dynamic of the North and keeping us under their control. I would just like to mention some of them: the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. These two organizations created at the Conference of Bretton Woods in the United States. However, this influence of the North with the adjustment policies, structural adjustment in order to develop our economy and to create governance in our national states, they have impoverished our countries even more. They set up systemic corruption schemes in order so that national governments would just submit themselves to the debt system. They denationalized the companies and economic assets, and they perpetuated this situation up until today. 2 minutes? Only one? I only have 2 more pages to go. 1 minute for this page and another one for this one. Is it possible? Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. So, together with the fight against the IMF, we have the need of breaking with a dollar as the only currency in international trade. There are positive signals in the horizon with BRICS and the countries of Sahel. Other fights that I include that will be leading the foundations for the redress of victims of transatlantic traffic and for globalization South-South is the fight for peace. In the 60s, the counterculture movements, they led the fight in the cultural context as somewhat romantic with things like make love and not war. And, well, the older people in the room probably remember these. The hippies, we were going through the tragedy of the Vietnam War, and the fight for peace was an urgency. And it was necessary to fight for peace. Now, the anniversary for defeat and the fight for peace was an urgent and interactive moral. How many wars have taken place from that time on? We cannot count them. They were imposed by the same country that was defeated in the Vietnam War. They need war and more wars because they are the greater producers of interest, and they reduce the pressure for employment in the country, in the United States, of course, and other countries whose economies are based in the industry of war. Today, I see the fight for peace as a blow against the United States capitalism. When we speak of peace, we need to include internal peace and public safety and security in our same countries. Together with this fight for peace, we need to fight against the NATO that affects the northern countries allied with the countries of the South with wars. So these wars also bring us to another foundational fight of peoples that fight for their redress and repairs in a new globalizations, environmental fights. And from the very beginning, unfortunately, up until today, they were tense because they were made to believe that defending the nature would have this idyllic vision of protecting their animals and the environment and ecosystems. This defense that would stop the economic development, the creation of employment, and the fight against hunger and other crucial human needs. This was a counterattack of our enemies. Today, the historical tension is even greater due to the climate crisis and the probable and irreversible consequences. These are consequences that allowed the country to be inhabitable. When we see multi-millionaire magnate defending Mars occupation, we are facing something that is even more terrible, the moral collapse of the global north. The problems stems from climate change are disastrous, and they are visible all the time. There are droughts and there's loss of rivers that were never experienced before, as was the case in some rivers of the Amazonian from Brazil. There's also floodings, like we suffered in Brazil. This is another consequence of global warming, as is the migration of people, especially from Africa. And this makes the tour through Mediterranean in a true humanitarian crisis. Capitalism, in its final phase of imperialism, has promoted successive crimes and attempts against nature and human rights. So how do we face these evils? Capitalism that took the power all over the world through revolutions as the English and the French revolutions, now they want us to believe that there's only one way to change: the alleged free elections. Well, the Latino Barometro, an independent organization that carries out polls and surveys in our countries. We also have one in Africa. And this organization has revealed that since the beginning of the 21st century, there's a low addition of the population of the countries to democratic values. Brazil, for example, we are below the surveyed countries in a report published in 2003 by PRODAL, a program from the United Nations for the Development of Democracy. There are signs in the horizon that were already visible, but the left stopped interpreting or reading and doing this in-depth analysis of the context. They did not perceive their situation. And less than 20 years later, we had the coup d'etat against Dilma's president in Brazil in 2013, and the election of Bolsonaro in 2018. And in Argentina, Milei took office through an election in 2003. So this has happened with several countries of Latin America that chose their own executioners, and everyone apparently constitutional and free. But now we need to talk about democracy with their own surnames. Bourgeoisie, a liberal bourgeoisie, electoral, so a political system imagined for the people and by the people, but it has turned into a system of oppression for the masses, but with their consent through the vote. Now, really, this was my last page. This is the last page. I did not cheat you. It was the last page, but I would like to close. 6 pages in all. Now, to close, I think that we need 2 tools: politics and techniques. But before, we need to make a criticism, because it is out of the mixture of these fights for a new South-South globalization and for a redress. This is how we will create universal conscience, as Milton Santos dreamt. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Diva, por tu análisis, por esto.
Thank you very much, Diva, for your analysis. I loved it what you said. This is what they want to make us believe. I think that it was a great analysis. Everything you've highlighted, related to they want us to believe. They want to make us believe. And now I will introduce Mr. Jorge Taiana, former Foreign Affairs Minister. He had great times as part of the Latin American Free Trade Consortium. And, well, we introduced him already, so we will start directly with his words. Thank you so much. I would like to thank the university, and I would like to thank the OSC, because I think that it's not only timely, but also very much needed. So thank you and welcome. And I hope that this is just one of the many activities that we can carry on forward in a mancomunated and joint manner. First of all, I would like to make a reminder. This year, we will be celebrating our 70th anniversary of the Indonesian conference with the participation of very representative figures in the decolonization process and this idea of a new world different from the traditional world. We have...
Estaba Sukarno, estaba Xuenlai,
and we were
representing Africa and Asia. Latin America was not represented at that conference. However, in Argentina, we had an administration that agreed and coincided with many of their principles. General Perón was our president, and he was very sympathetic of everything that came to the creation of the non-allied movement. So in the region, we had this feeling and this way of thinking that try to differentiate from the imperial north or colonial north that had so much influence on us. I would like now to switch to our current times. First, we are living times of change, times of turmoil, very difficult times, transitional times. However, the key piece of information, the key data is that we are undergoing a change of times, not times of change, which would be a minor thing. We are going through the change of an era, such as, for example, it was the Industrial Revolution, but it's much bigger than that. This process is transforming not just the economy, relationships, and production mechanisms, but it's also directly transforming our daily lives, our culture, our habits, uses, and beliefs. At such a globalization scale, but without the same effects throughout. On the contrary, it has very profoundly differentiated effects. But I would like to insist on this issue of the change of an era, because this turning point is what has brought us to where we're standing today. And where are we standing today? Well, we've gone through 2 or 3 fundamental processes. In 1989, the fall of the Berlin Wall and the transient end to the existent socialism, that is to say, the Soviet Union. Then there was a time of Fukuyama, which I would say, or call it, a single hegemonic dominance, just one power, the United States of America, and global power that was exercised, they thought, throughout the entire world, imposing an economic model, neoliberalism, and a political model, which was liberal democracy. And this was multiplied throughout the world. It was even taken to the world with the engagement of multilateral organizations such as the United Nations. And we had several conferences on different topics. In 1992, there was the first one on the Summit of the Earth, and we started dealing with climate change issues in 1993 at Vienna on human rights, and we tried to unite what the Cold War had separated. Civil and economic and social rights. And also in 1994, we had the population conference. We had in 1995 the Beijing conference, a conference that is the turning point on the struggle of women for their rights and gender equality. And this ends up, I mean, they were all very streamlined and everybody was happy with this. But then there was a conference which was the conference in Natal, South Africa, which it was a tribute to the end of apartheid, and it was held in South Africa, and it was against racism, discrimination, and xenophobia. This was held in 2001. This conference ended on October 7th. And this was a complete failure. Why was it a failure? Because there was no final document, no final statement, and the High Commissioner of the United States for the Human Rights, Mary Robinson, had to resign as a result of the conference failure because they couldn't agree on two key issues. One, the issue of Arab Israel, the Palestine issue. There was no agreement on that. The developed countries and Israel did not want to accept any of the agreements, as we've seen later in history, and we see it today, tragically. And the second topic was the rejection of the developed countries, especially the United Kingdom and Holland, to deny the redress to the populations that had suffered slavery and the African population taken to other continents and the colonies to perform slave work. They did not want to accept the redress. They did not want to recognize their responsibility. And the Africans only wanted a statement and for the multilateral organizations to have special programs that recognized and acknowledged this situation and that they accepted more favorable conditions for countries who are less developed, and that this was attributable to massacres, the slandering played out by the colonial powers. So I was part of that conference. I attended that conference, and we did not have direct flights. So to go to South Africa, Johannesburg, there were no direct flights from Argentina. We had to fly to Sao Paulo, and from Sao Paulo, we had to fly to Johannesburg. It's not really close. Those who love to go to Miami fly like 10 hours, and those who go to Madrid have to fly over 12 hours. And Johannesburg was only 6 hours away, but there were no direct flights. And when I came back, I thought, well, something broke. Something is not right. And this implicit or tacit agreement broke. An agreement between the liberal sector in Western capitalism, pro-democracy against dictatorships, they had contributed in a way to drive them forward. And another side, which was linked to financial reforms and the en vogue of financial capital. So these two sectors were rivals. However, they agreed on one issue, which was the big enemy was the state, a state that kills, massacres populations, and the social movements and popular movements, and on the other side, government or state that takes away resources from the population and delivers them to other interested stakeholders. So this parallel rivalry broke, and 4 days afterwards we have the terrorist attack to the World Trade Center in New York, and this just showed what had already been broken in the international politics landscape and the possibilities to find a way out to this post-war world. And I think that this is important to consider, because if not, you will attribute this to individual acts or lone wolf acts. And these big transformations were ongoing and existed because of other more deeply rooted causes. And the same for the issue of the technological revolution that we are experiencing now. And this is the basis for this change in era. And this is a result of the fact that, and this is what Bersitsky said a while back, that we were experiencing never before seen technological revolution. And this revolution transforms power relationships, the production mechanisms, transforms beneficiaries, and it has very deep-rooted political effects. When we address and analyze the movement of a bipolar world to a multipolar world, which is something that's going on right now, but it's not peaceful, and it's not simple, and it's not immediate. So this is all rooted in a material basis. So we have to go back to a materialistic analysis, a transformation in production mechanisms and production relationships which are triggering or causing these deep-rooted transformations. The way that knowledge is appropriated and transformed is what is being disputed or under dispute at the world right now. And of course, obviously, this passage from unilateralism to plurilateralism will continue into the future. But they are very conflictive passages. And as Friedman stated, they thought that New York was the future, but Shanghai is the future. New York is like Paris or London. It's a 21st century world, but Shanghai or Shenzhen and many other China cities are showing where the future lies. And we see this also in Arab countries, which have very specific characteristics and that are also building realities of the 21st century or of the future, at least in the first quarter of the future or the 21st century. In the Western world, on this side of the world, one of the main consequences has been the uprising of the rebirth of the ultra-right. In Argentina, ultra-right is our current administration. We cannot say it's a right or a crazy man who's governing. We are being governed by the ultra-right with the support of the right. In other countries, they have more conservative or traditional right countries that are trying to undermine the ultra-right. But in this country, in Argentina, they are supporting the ultra-right in saying that they will destroy the popular or the workers' movements, and in Argentina's case, Peronism. And they call us the brown heads because we have brown hair or dark hair. Now I don't because I have gray hair, but they call us brown hairs or the browns. And that is what they want to end up with. They want to put an end to any traces of the welfare state, and they're honoring their leaders, Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher. Margaret Thatcher once said that society does not exist. What exists are individuals. Societies do not exist. Individuals exist. Can I say something? What's your legacy? And after thinking, she said, Tony Blair. That's a joke. Oh, she said it, but I'm saying it as a joke. Reagan said something else. Reagan said, the state is not part of the solution, it's part of the problem. So on that horizon is that today we have built what you see. I would like to highlight now the need for the union or the work in unison of the big or the great South. They tried to show us the world as if it was a new Cold War type fight, two sides, Argentina on one, the United States on one side and China on the other side. Either you're with the United States or you stand by China. We are on the Western world. We are the Americas. We have to be aligned with the United States because China is far away. They speak a different language. We can't understand them. Former Foreign Affairs minister said in Argentina that they all look alike. Yes, she said that. She said that. So, we are not facing a new Cold War. We are facing something completely different. We are facing a world that is modifying, that is changing. The focus or the center of power is going from the North Atlantic to the south of Asia, where the countries there need to seek more centralism or protagonism because this was lost in the past, but now it's becoming evident that Africa, and with some going back and forth also in Latin America, there's a search for something different, something new. In South America, Latin America, South America, and the Global South, we have two clear examples of that. The first one being the meetings we held between the Arab League and South America at state level, which is a limitation, but it was a step forward. We held several of these meetings, and we were able to meet each other and get to know each other better. On the other were the meetings between Africa and South America, which were fewer and more restricted. However, they were very fruitful. And the sense of all this was in trying to realize that there was huge potential there in that work in unity, in unison. There's a quote from an Argentine gentleman in 1889, many years ago. We had the first Pan American conference held in Washington. And the United States wanted to coordinate throughout with the dollar, the monetary and financial systems in different countries. I was Foreign Affairs Ministry. Those were the meetings. We had 6 months traveling through New York, New Orleans, Chicago, Boston. Fantastic. Now they just last 2 days. You don't even know where you're at, and everything goes very poorly. And the two Argentine delegates or representatives, they were both former presidents, Roque Sáenz Peña, one of them, who was the one who established the male universal and secret vote only for men, and he was a hero in Peru in the war against Chile. And the second one was Manuel Quintana, a more conservative gentleman. I mean, it's hard to find a more conservative gentleman. He had a smoking, goatee, beard, very elitist gentleman. And they opposed the United States policy to have a single currency. And there is a speech by Sáenz Peña, very long, about the Asian League and many other topics. But he ends up, because the United States representatives wanted to update the Monroe Doctrine, dated from 1823, America for the Americans, which was an anti-Spanish and anti-UK idea, but then it was a pro-United States idea or doctrine. So Sáenz Peña ends up his speech by saying, and going against this, the America for the Americas, he said America for humanity. And he said it for other reasons, and, you know, the bond Argentina had with the UK. But the important thing is to take that up again. Latin America is a region that has the wish to work with all of the good-willing countries throughout the world and all those who uphold the principles of respect to international law, non-meddling on the internal affairs of other countries, respect for multilateralism, respect for the sovereignty of the states, and the non-meddling on internal affairs, and a peaceful solution to conflicts and controversy. And this is what creates amongst the countries in the South the possibility to have a common basis on the political aspect. And then we can talk plenty on the economic aspect, because of course we need to reform the Bretton Woods structure, which is the structure of the winners of the Second World War, minus the Soviet Union, who, because the Cold War was not on yet, had not a lot of participation in Bretton Woods, which was more of a fight between the British and the North Americans. And that's the world we want. We want a world where the countries in the South can share amongst them, and we can become a power or a stronghold, because the concentration of power in the hands of the powerful makes them even more powerful and makes those who have less to be even more poor. So they concentrate power and they concentrate wealth on the developed countries, but also in the corporations, private corporations, who many of them are even more powerful than some countries. If you take a look at, for example, the worth of the IT corporations, and you look at the GDP of 100 and 130 countries, well, it's even higher in those corporations. The United States, when the 20th century began, when they had the issue of oil, they had the Sherman anti-monopoly law, and they tried to curtail Rockefeller's power. But it's not happening now, and it's not the first time that the big corporations, private corporations, are more powerful than some countries. India was conquered by the Indias Orientales, the Western Indies Corporation, until the troops were able to repel the uprising of the revolutionaries in the 50s. So up to that point, corporations ruled India. So we have concentration of power and concentration of wealth, and we need to advocate for a different type of power and wealth distribution. And that requires a conversation, dialogue, and as Manssour very well said, it cannot just be the effort of some governments. That's all right, but even if you're well-intended, it's not enough. It's not enough. You need to have a movement that is deep-rooted in society and cultural elements and knowledge, and well-rooted in exchange. We need to break from isolation. The powerful meet all the time, but they're hindering the southern countries to meet. So what we've seen today, this shameful rejection of the visas to some Ethiopian colleagues, it's not a coincidence, and it's not an issue of racism or lack of knowledge. It's a state policy to hinder communication between Latin America, the Creole, or whatever you want to call it, and Africa. And the only country that has a key policy of state on that is Brazil. They value their African roots. This is very conspicuous. It's something they experience on a day-to-day basis. We don't have that. We do have an organization, Peace and Security in the South Atlantic, that includes all of the African states that have Atlantic coastlines, and Brazil, Uruguay, and Argentina. This organization, or this treaty, this agreement, was stagnant for years. It was signed in 1986, and it was stagnant because the US and the UK don't like it. But we do like it, so it has been revitalized. I've been gone overboard with my words, so I will now say everything I haven't. It is clear that we have to change globalization. Globalization is undergoing a different stage. It's not the expansive or uniform globalization as we knew it. There are things that have become globalized, such as the financial, and there are other things that have been de-globalized and have been transformed into regional or local aspects, and this is simultaneous. This process is on a simultaneous basis, and it's very contradictory. However, in the region, we should rebuild the regional integration, because we have gone back. We've seen this in Mercosur as well. We have gone back miles, and the Brazilian plan has very clear-cut objectives, rebuilding of projects, and more active policies to rebuild Mercosur, and including Bolivia is a step forward. We have Venezuela pending. He was separated, and nothing has been said so far as how we'll deal with this further on. But the issue of the expanded Mercosur and the recovery of Mercosur is very important for us, and we need to also strengthen South-South dialogue. This is something that makes us better, and also it strengthens us. When we became stronger at the Organization of Trade, and we want to ensure, some wanted to ensure that there was no development in the southern countries, even in the Doha round. It was called the round of development, but the only thing they couldn't achieve was development. It was the round of the anti-development. Finally, that was also paralyzed or non-acting. These are the times of power shifts, shift towards the south, Also, we share with the Arab countries many things. Argentines especially have too much in common. Half of our population, well, not half, but a big part of our population has Arab descent. We call them the Turkish, and I know that you Arabs love it when we call them Turks. But we call the Jews Russians, and the Italians, we call them gringos. So there is a big confusion with our nicknames. But and jokes aside, Argentines' identity cannot be thought of, or it's unthinkable without the contribution of the Arabic culture. We have two penetration ways. We have the Arab culture in Spain and the many centuries that were in Spain, and we have also migration, Arab migration towards the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century. So, African culture, it's a bit less. Our roots were lost. We do have some groups in Cabo Verde, and they have strong African identity. But in the northern region, we had a strong African presence. We didn't have a lot of Africans because we didn't have slavery. We didn't have sugarcane plantations. We had some slaves in the sugarcane plantations, and we didn't have much of that. And then it was lost because there was a lot of mixing of the races. In Argentina, not in other Latin American countries, not even in Peru, which is quite close to us, and they did have a large African population with a strong identity, at least in the coastal areas, and also Uruguay has the candombe and African culture, which is much larger than ours. But we have some in Corrientes, in Misiones, in Catamarca. We have a lot of provinces that have African culture. They've lost a lot of it, but they still hold to some, and we need to recover and revitalize it.
Bien. No, me parece muy bien el aporte.
They are making a comment in the audience, but without microphone, so we cannot translate. Apologies for that.
No, está muy bien. No, yo lo tengo con información, pero sí sé.
I do know that it's very limited. If you go to Catamarca, when 40% is from an African origin, if you say that in Catamarca, they look at you as if you're crazy. But 40% of the population of Catamarca was taken there to work in the sugarcane, and nobody remembers that. And when you see someone from Catamarca with curly hair, you think, well, this person must have some African blood. However, they don't dare think about it. So we do have those things. So to conclude, I just wanted to reinstate that there is a need of deepening these relationship between America, or that is the South America, the America of the 33 Latin and Caribbean countries, with Africa and Asia. And this requires government agreements, but also it requires a lot more of dialogue and contact among the countries in the region. There's even small things, but the fact that we have a flight from Ethiopian Airlines has favored communications a lot, even though we have one flight. But this changed a lot. And it will also change if in December we have a flight to Shanghai through Auckland directly. So we are in a part away from the world, towards the south and close to the Antarctica, where we also have part of the Argentinian territory. So we have to make an effort in order to stop thinking of ourselves as end of the rail country, that is a country that is towards the end of the path, and we have to think that we are at the center if we consider Jujuy, the northern province, as the southern pole. Thank you. Thank you very much, Jorge Taiana, for recovering history and for giving us this perspective of future. And now we're going to hear to Manssour bin Mussallam, and I would like to congratulate you. I read your letter to the Mediterranean, so this is like notes from the world. And it has a very interesting dedication, those who refuse to the resignation. So this is the club of those who do not conform themselves from the Greater South. Very interesting letter for this moment and a great perspective to the future. Thank you very much. Thank you for having read this letter. It seems that very few people at the OSC have read it. Thank you very much for your words. Now, I wouldn't like to speak too much, and because I believe that the speakers have already depicted an excellent outlook. Just some reflections that I would like to share with you, but just starting off with the Turkish people. It makes a lot of sense because I believe that in Argentina you received a lot of immigrant Arabs from Syria, Lebanon, and all that part of the world. And back then this was part of the Ottoman Empire, so they came with a Turkish passport. So you are kind of forgiven for calling Turkish the Arabs. So I believe that an essential aspect, because Jorge talked about the importance of the unity of the South, and this is what we need in our countries, but this also stems from being pragmatic. It's not only principles, morality, and horizons. Of course, we have all this, because I said I wanted to start off with the Turkish because I am interested in Latin America, and I have been interested in this for years. Now, the pragmatic thing is that our countries share realities and challenges in spite of the extreme differences and realities that we do have in our continents. The Arab world and Latin America, for example, they are the two regions of the world that are mirrors, even though they may not seem so. We are the only two regions of the world where we sort of like share the same language. We have Portuguese and we have Amazigh, Berber, Kurdo. So we have other languages also, but we are the only two regions in the world where we have several countries speaking almost the same language. The only two regions that share more or less a culture. There's an Argentinian culture, of course, no doubt about that, but the Argentinian can reflect themselves in the Mexican or Colombian culture because each country has their own characteristics, of course, but it's Latin America. And the same thing goes for the Arabic world. Mercedes Sosa is sung in Mexico. Kulthum, that was from Egypt, would be sung in Saudi Arabia and in Yemen and Lebanon. And we are the only two regions in the world that historically have had this urge for having this political unity. And this is the two regions of the world where this failed. And we are two regions of the world that have a lot to learn, one from the other. And I believe that this is the dynamics that we need to take into account in this South-South cooperation. And this is one of the political challenges that we are facing, is that we need to constitute among governments also the participation of peoples, but we do need the agreements among governments. And this implies generating this community of mutual learning among sovereign peers. And I say this, of course, to emphasize the importance of learning as to why these efforts of union in Latin America and the Caribbean failed, and why did they fail in the Arabic world. Because if we do not learn why we fail at a regional level, how should we expect to just bring together at a continental level? Of course, there are many reasons, but I believe that one of the important reasons that we need to highlight is, I'd allow myself to do some philosophy. I don't know if you realize, but in the last few years, the term people is no longer used. We're talking about the populations or the citizens, but not the peoples. But words matter, because what is a population? Population is a term from the statistics that define the set of individuals that occupy a space. Whereas a people is a population that has gone through time. So people are heirs of a memory, and they are custodians of a promise for future. And I say this: population, space, people, time, and we need to integrate regional, but also among different continents, and this is to found peoples, and this requires time. It is not enough with the space. So therefore, to found a Latin American people in terms of integration, to found an Arabic peoples in terms of the Arabic integration, or to found a people in terms of an African integration, we need tools that are stable within time, integration tools that are stable in time. And where we are failing, I believe, in the Arabic world, and I think that this also has been the case in Latin America, where we failed is that we precisely built unstable tools, because they were founded based on the ideological affinity among certain governments, or sometimes they were based on personal affinities among our leaders. So what happens? The government changes, they do not share the ideology, therefore the tool is no longer used, integration is over. So when we speak about this South integration and the geopolitical challenges that we have, I believe that the first issue that we need to debate is why do we speak about a third way of development, but not in the sense of blur. We need to speak about an alternative way of development. And I say this because in the South, we are the champions of the world in entering selfish and necessary fights among ourselves. And we need to articulate this horizon, this way of development that we call at the OSCE the third way of development. That is not a third model. And just to steal something from Perón, who had written a letter, I believe it was to Juan Manuel Abal Medina, I'm not sure, but he had written a letter when he was in Spain, and he said about Peronism, and we have to be honest, even though I have read a lot, I still do not understand it. I have to be honest. But he says this extraordinary statement that I steal for the third way of development, and I use this in my letter, and that is that Peronism as a movement is a river where we have multiple currents that coincide and flow together. And when we talk about the Greater South, we are talking about a powerful river where there are multiple flows converging, but they flow towards the same horizon. And then we can say we are right-wing, left-wing, north or south. That could be very important. It's essential, of course, but at a national level. When we talk about a multilateralism in the South, we need to speak that whether we are from right or left, we share some essential interests that could only be achieved or translate when we work together. And I say this because right now, I cannot speak of a collective group of the OSCE because this is not something that we have debated. But as a Secretary General, I can say that I'm not interested in arriving to a multipolar world because, in my opinion, what this implies, it would be a world of several blocks, not a Cold War, because I fully agree, but there are countries that are very much influenced by China, others could be influenced by Nigeria or South Africa. And I say this because if we talk about multipolarity, there are multiple poles. And I'm not interested in having multiple poles. I believe that our purpose needs to be to build a pluriversal world, a world in which we can coexist, we can have several cosmovisions of the world or models of the world as we share some essential values and principles. But in order to do this, we came across a challenge because we talk a lot about this. We talk about the Greater South, but the truth is that for the majority of us, the South is just an abstract concept, a point in the map, a slogan to fulfill. We speak about the South, but very few of us here today feel we belong to the South. The Arabic, African identities, Latin American identities, Asian identities, or Caribbean identities are lived and are lived, but not as What about the identity from the South? Like, I feel Latin American, not in my case, but if I say I feel Latin America, but I also feel from the South, just as I also feel I'm a human being. And in order to build this, a part that I believe is fundamental is that our peoples need to get to know themselves. But we cannot speak about a gathering or a meeting of our peoples, and this is where I want to be more specific. We cannot talk about an elemental South-South cooperation, but as Jorge very well put it, the issue is that it's impossible to connect among ourselves unless we have the infrastructure that allows and enables this cooperation. If the cooperation is too costly in terms of time, in terms of money, because everything has to go through the north. There's one flight, that's true, that goes from Africa to Latin America and the Caribbean. The flight from Ethiopian Airlines, the one I took that brought me here, and has a stopover in Sao Paulo, and then it comes to Buenos Aires. Very well. But if I go to the Caribbean in May, I visited Cuba due to an event taking place in Havana, and I had to travel 37 hours. And this is just to get to Cuba. And I had to return with a short flight of 26 hours. And really, last year, also May last year, I don't know why I have these long trips in May, but in May, I was in Suriname. Suriname, because there was a meeting of the Foreign Affairs Ministers of the Caribbean States Association. I was an observer there, and after this, I had to go to a different event in Nairobi, Kenya. Now, what would have been almost a direct flight, like 15 hours, well, it took me 30. Why? Because the only way of making it to Nairobi on time was going through Amsterdam. That is, I had to fly the opposite direction. I had to fly north to go back to the south. So we need to invest in infrastructure that allows specifically the movement of peoples and individuals, movement of persons, the movement of goods, the movement of ideas among the South. And this does not require a great, impossible investment, because Addis Ababa is a hub from Africa. So from Addis, you can reach all the countries in Africa. Panama is the hub in Latin America. So only one flight from Ethiopia, from Addis to Panama, and both continents would be connected. But infrastructure is something, because we also need to recognize that we are facing a reality of powerful structures, international powerful structures, without entering in the dynamics of condemning just because. But we need to recognize that we're facing an obstacle, that is the international structures that do not recognize our perspectives nor our interests. We are being treated as minorities or peripheries, where we are the global majority as countries and in terms of population. And even in economic terms, if we take the whole South, we are the majority. We are not insignificant. But multilateralism structures that we have are structures that do not recognize or they transform our presence in something symbolic in order to make the conscience at ease, to pacify their conscience, but without taking into account our demands. So I believe that one of the main challenges of the Greater South, beyond what I have already mentioned, is the international financial architecture that conditions the actions of our governments. During the pandemic, and I say this because the OSCE is an intergovernmental, relatively young organization, so I say this as a Secretary General. I try to keep myself young. But our organization was founded in January 2020. So we were created just like with COVID-19. So this experience of the pandemic also molded and forged the vision of our organization and their approach to some issues in the middle of the pandemic. Just amidst the pandemic, where there was this initiative of suspending the debt that should have been called the initiative of the accumulation of the paying the debt services for later on. However, in spite of this initiative, because the creditors realized the countries won't be able to pay because of the crisis, because of this paralysis, the world stopped. And if the debtors cannot pay, the creditors disappear as well. So they said, okay, but in spite of this initiative, they said, well, our countries in the South, we have paid collectively over $400 billion in 2021 in interests of the debt. So this is more than twice than the alleged help for development, assistance for development received that same year. And when I said that we are even an economic majority, in a given year there are $2 trillion that go from the Greater South to the north, $1 trillion that goes from the north to the south, and we are talking about all kinds of flows, illicit, right? So clearly there's a structural problem. It's not that we have a lack of capacity in the South to produce the necessary wealth or economic work. And the last piece of information in 2021, also our friends from the IMF, the Fund of International Misery, well, they issued over $600 billion, unprecedented, $600 billion in special overdraft rights in order to support the states that had to spend more than what they had budgeted because of the pandemic. Out of these 600 billion, only 7% was distributed to African countries. 54 countries in Africa received 7% of 6. So only 8% was distributed in Latin America and the Caribbean. Now, most of these assistance went to those who needed it the least. The U.S. received 30% of these 600 billion, and I mention this because it is essential for our countries to work jointly if we want to overcome the challenges that we encounter. We need to work jointly in order to transform this international financial architecture. And this has to do with two dynamics. One, the Union of Debtors, the ministries of Treasury, they founded the club, and the club of debtors, of mutual leverage of debtors. So we have the Paris Club, and now we have the Addis Ababa Club, in order to negotiate collectively financing that is less conditions and with more concessions, but this is not enough. We need also to establish our own financial institutions, because we are working under the mandate of the General Assembly, the establishment of the Development Bank for the Greater South. But we need to have our own financial institutions. That is essential. But both things are still not enough, because the World Bank and the IMF, well, they tell us, look, with a GPEC initiative, we try to relieve the debt, and it's true, the IMF and the World Bank erased the debt in 100% for like 10 countries, Somalia and others. And they said, this does not work, because clearly we see them again, and these are indebted countries. So the debt relief does not work. And it's true. Debt relief per se is enough. It's not enough, because we need to address the roots that leads us to indebt ourselves. And I think that one of our geopolitical challenges, if we want to turn tectonic political force and strengths, if we want to achieve this, we need to have a collective strategy in order to invest in strategic sectors for development. And when I say strategic sectors, I say this because we need also to deal the economic weaknesses of our economy that generate our dependencies. We're always told, the southern countries, that we need to use tourism as an engine for economic development. Why? Because we want dollars. And I have nothing against tourism as such, although we could debate. But when we receive these tourist mass in countries that have not achieved food sovereignty in their own majority, they do not have energy sovereignty, they do not have high added value industrialization. So when they receive these tourists, they need to import the food, they need to import more fuel that they were not being able to produce, or oil they couldn't refine. They need to import more cars, buses, ACs that they do not manufacture, and they need to do that in dollars that they do not have. Therefore, I incur in more debts for things that will end up servicing those tourists that are the ones that are supposed to bring the dollars that I need. So clearly, and when they do all this, of course, I am also killing the possibility of competing to the agricultural sector. I am also killing the opportunity of a businessman of running their own factory, because everything is being imported at a scale market level. So we need to invest in sectors that in the mid and long term can overcome this vicious circle. So I think that we need to articulate this as a strategic horizon for our countries if we want to overcome the political challenges. Of course, in inclusive education, well, there's no development without education, quality education, that is. Integrated health, that is one, and comprehensive health, one that recognizes the interdependence between the human being health, flora and fauna.
Desarrollo tecnológico endógeno.
Endogenous technological development. I believe it is also essential. We cannot talk today about a South-South cooperation nor about sovereignty as long as we have this technical and digital gap between or divide between the North and the South that also makes us dependent from some vendors that if prices go up tomorrow, and this also includes our governments that depend and rely on softwares and platforms that are sold from abroad, and tomorrow if prices go up, well, our governments have to say, yes, we will pay, because if not, the whole national system collapses. So we need to develop our own technologies, because imports and technology donations are not enough. Because there's no divide that could be closed with just donations. And these are all technologies that have patents that will become obsolete in 10 years' time. And then we will wake up in the same situation in which we are today. We are passengers and not drivers of this technological revolution. So we need to develop our own technologies, even at a regional level, in order to generate these scale economies. We need to make the most of open source softwares, and we need to be able to close this technological divide, but South-South as an issue that is strategically important, and it becomes geopolitical importance, because we talk about a lot about the North, and we talk about the North as if the North is still that old North that we used to know, the US, France or Spain. And yes, of course, this exists and we need to take it into account, but there's a new North, a new digital and private North that reproduces the same dynamics of colonialism through data extractivism, through the fact that this data extractivism comes mainly from the South, because these technological companies know that from a demographic level, we are not only the majority in the world, but we are young societies that will use more technology in terms of percentages than does in the North. The future of Facebook is not in the US. The future of Facebook is in Africa, Latin America, and Asia. However, I do not recall when was the last time that Facebook or Instagram or Twitter have paid taxes in any of our countries, even though they make all the money around here. And they said before that there's a concentration of wealth. It's not the first time that great companies have a lot to do in governments, of course, but I believe that it is the first time, and we need to have a perspective. It's a great geopolitical challenge. It's the first time that we have only one person concentrating so much power and wealth. When our colleague in the battle, Elon Musk, bought Twitter, well, he bought Twitter for $44 billion. This is more than the nominal GDP of Jordan. And this was only one transaction. One man alone could spend more than the nominal GDP of a whole country. And that same man is the owner of 62% of all the satellites in orbit. 62% of the satellites. And I deeply believe, I say this with a great respect, I believe you cause me trouble later, but we have cameras here. The point is, I do believe that it's important to be concrete. We cannot just stay with the analysis. We need to go to action, and we need to act and move fast. But having said this, I do believe, and I say this to all the intellectuals that are present here today, I think that there's a duty today that we need to put the effort in the theoretical framework, because the theoretical frameworks are not made to face the emergent realities that we have today, to guide our actions. But now I go back to the strategic sectors in a very fast way. Technology, infrastructure, not only infrastructure, internal national infrastructure, but I mean infrastructure that connects peoples, connecting our countries, that allows for this exchange among human beings, among intellectuals and among companies of the Great South. And high added value industrialization, because our countries are still in the majority exporters of commodities or intermediates, raw material, and importers of high added value products. And just to give an example, I like, although you're not known for this in Argentina, but I like to put the example of coffee. Why? Because if we want to build collectives, groups, also symbols are important. There's no identity without symbols. And I believe that the best symbol of the South is coffee. It's a tree whose fruit is universal, because everybody drinks coffee all over the world. But the roots only grow in the South, in Latin America, the Caribbean, Africa, and Asia. However, when we see who are the 10 greatest exporters of coffee in the world, 4 are from a region in the world that they do not have coffee plants. And just to name a few: France, Italy, Sweden, and Germany. Each one of them, they export more coffee than Uganda or Ethiopia, one of the greatest exporters in Africa, and more than Colombia. The only exception is Brazil. And Brazil is the greatest exporter, the greatest in the world, coffee exporter. But why? Because we still export green coffee beans, and they export processed coffee, coffee capsules, instant coffee. And I'm going to be really honest. We have the headquarters in Ethiopia, where we have extraordinary coffee. Ricardo Forster can confirm this. But in my office, I have an espresso machine. With chocolate is the same. And I have an espresso machine because at the office, I just want to get my capsule, and I do not have the time for roasting and preparing and making my coffee. So what does it mean? That while our coffee producing countries export coffee at an average of $2.5, the bag of coffee, $2.5, and this price is fair trade. It has that merit. Now, the coffee processing companies, not producers. They export the coffee, the capsule, at an average of $40, not 40. So this means that of the $465 billion of the worldwide coffee market, producing countries represent only 5%. So it is not enough to produce coffee in our countries. We need to transform in our country. In the case of coffee, we need to invest in the capsule factories. We need to invest to preserve the roasted coffee, and we also need to invest in training the masters and the specialists of coffee roasting, and we have to open markets. I understand Argentina does not manufacture coffee, right? The same thing goes for Africa. Not all the southern countries manufacture coffee. So very well, we would open markets with our neighbors who do not manufacture coffee, and it would be cheaper to buy from the neighbors the manufactured coffee than importing coffee from Sweden, or Switzerland. So we need to invest in high-value industrialization. And what I say about coffee can be applied to cotton, to cocoa, to because to lithium, yes. Today, most of the cobalt that is essential for the ion lithium batteries that are used in electrical cars, most of them come from only one country, Congo. However, they do not have electrical cars themselves. Why? Because they export it but non-processed. So we need to invest, for instance, in factories of ion lithium batteries, but in the country where you have the greatest amount of cobalt in the world. So the critical minerals, because today we are sold that there's this ecological transition and this clean face of the future, but all the necessary minerals for the solar panels, for the lithium, ion lithium batteries, and for all the things that we are told day after day after day in terms of this ecological transition is manufactured in the south. The critical minerals are in the south, and we have to use these critical minerals in a geopolitical way, strategically, in order to push and drive our development. And I say this, I have used more time than what I should have. Well, I sort of like missed my plane, that's what they would say in Cuba, but I just wanted to emphasize that this union of our countries in this diversity, this universality that needs to be built, this effort that is ours is not addressed against the North. It cannot be like that, because we reject the idea of defining ourselves in opposition to the rest. We are not what we deny. We are what we jointly affirm. And this is why this colloquium is so important. Thank you.
We thank our presenters and our moderator. This will mark the end of this first session of the Great South Colloquium. We will have a 15-minute coffee break, and then we will reconvene.